Shoppers really can shop local, as in right from their neighbourhood. These stores don't have big polluting refrigerated trucks delivering fresh produce because it all comes from the roof. That company now has 4 rooftop farms in Montreal, capable of feeding 2% of the city, and they have way more farms in their pipeline. And rather than demanding 2/3 of the world's energy, what if a town like Port Macquarie could generate more energy than it needs? What about 500% more? Wild Portreed, which is a Bavarian village of around 2,600 residents, has invested in so much solar, wind, biogas and hydro that it's gone well beyond energy independence. And now it makes millions of dollars from sales of the surplus power back to the grid. Sure beats paying taxes. So yes, cities are the cause of many of our problems, but they also hold the promise to solve exactly the same problems that they cause. And whether we like it or not, urban areas will shape humanity's future. And that's because cities is where everyone's going to be living. In 2012, little tech error there. Just going to jump back. There we go. In 2012, we passed the threshold of more than 50% of the world's population living in urban areas. So for the first time in human history, we are officially an urban species. We're an urban animal. And by the end of today, 200,000 people would have moved to a city or a town. By 2050, 70% of the world's population will live in urban areas. So this means that cities have the ability to change the course of humanity. They are a double-edged sword. While they offer the possibility of collapse, they also offer the possibility of reinvention. And it's always been that way. From the ancient river towns of Mesopotamia to the explosive life for themselves and their families. But all of this growth has had some unintended consequences. In our desire to grow, evolve, and make life better, we've created some problems. It's exactly these problems that got me into my profession, urban planning. But I didn't always know that I was going to end up this city junkie with a really weird fetish for construction cranes. I mean, how many of you knew exactly what you wanted to do when you finished school? Well, this was me. I had no idea. I worked in the local fish and chip shop, sometimes. Most of the time I spent bumming around at home, sponging off mum and dad. I spent my whole first year out of high school doing that, and I still had no idea or direction. But that changed for me overnight because of a phone call when I was 18. See, years before as an early teenager, I'd signed up with a modelling agency. Yeah, I know, right? Looking at that photo, hard to believe. And safe to say I never got any work. But years later, that agency called me and they said there was interest in me from a modelling agency overseas and asked me, did I want to go to Hong Kong in 2 weeks? I couldn't really see a big career ahead of me at Loader Takeaway, so I said yes. And you could never imagine that gangly, awkward teenager ended up becoming an international high-end fashion model. I was on runways, magazine covers, even billboards. And I've actually got some photos here to prove it did happen. And yes, they have been photoshopped to high heaven, but I'm telling you, it's still me under there. And I rocked up in Hong Kong. It was a wild ride from the start. I got to wear incredible fashion. I was chauffeured around in limousines, ushered into parties with celebrities. The champagne was free and endless. God, there were some good times. I even got to mingle with the hottest guys on the planet. Sadly, though, I'm going to admit they were not really interested in me. I think, though, they were just more interested in each other. But here's the point. That first trip to Hong Kong was my first time outside of Australia. Every family holiday we ever took was in the outback or on Fraser Island. So what I saw really shocked me. I realised just how entitled I'd been and just how damn lucky we are here in Australia. Never before had I seen poverty or environmental degradation on such a scale. It was severe, and it was heartbreaking, and it was eye-opening. And it started to eat me at my core. Because on the one hand, I was living this high-roller, glamorous lifestyle. And on the other hand, I was seeing toddlers begging for money and open sewers running through the streets. I realised I wanted to do something about it and that I wanted to make a difference. Now, please, by no means am I saying that models don't make a difference. Come on, if it wasn't for models, humanity would never have invented the duck pout. And believe me, we spent hours working on our duck pouts to perfect them. I do think the guys in this picture really nailed it way better than me though. Zoolander, eat your heart out, baby. But in all seriousness, I knew I couldn't keep modelling and I needed to change what I wanted to do. One night in Thailand at a hotel on my own, I had an epiphany. It sounds cliche, but in haste, I took the hotel pencil and notepad and I wrote across the top, how can I make a difference? This is that actual piece of paper from that night in that hotel when I was 19. My life changed from that moment. I came back to Australia, started studying. I got an environmental town planning degree and I haven't looked back since. I've spent the last 18 years investigating, researching and learning about the solutions to those problems that haunted me in my modelling years. Since then, I've had a son, and that has driven me to think more about our planet's future, and in particular, what the future of our cities are going to look like. When I say city of the future, it's quite likely that your mind conjures up something a little like this. Now, while this may look futuristic, I can assure you, our cities of the future are not going to be some Jetsons-inspired futuristic world. Nope, we're not all going to be flying around the city with jetpacks. And no, cities of the future are not going to look like a scene from the movie Tomorrowland. When people hear the term sustainable future city, they usually imagine skyscrapers, flying cars, robots, everything with a shiny steel and glass surface. Now, while this may look exciting and entertaining, I reckon this would be a pretty terrifying place to live. Like, you think you're busy now. Imagine how busy life would be in this city. And can you even imagine the power bills? No way. Let me just pop that bubble right now. Cities of the future will be far less futuristic and much more humanistic. Human-centric city development in balance with nature. See, for too long now, anthropogenic systems, buildings and infrastructure have been dominant in how we plan cities. Now it's time to retroactively shape our cities based on ecological systems, so that we blend the environment with the human-built form. Cities of the future are consciously designed built environments that restore and regenerate nature, that actually give back to nature, and in the process improves the way we live our lives, so that our lives are full of rich and meaningful experiences, that our lives are led with purpose, and we're healthy and happy, connected to one another, and as a species, we thrive. Imagine waking up to the gentle, relaxing noises of the city and enjoying the outdoors as you move through your day, doing so with complete confidence that you will get to where you need to go quickly and efficiently with all your daily needs conveniently met. The city of the future is about well-being, ease and comfort, where density has a human dimension, adapting to our ever-changing needs, nurturing relationships, connection to community and to nature, and accommodating the pleasures of everyday life. We know that being mindful and present makes us happier, right? There are endless self-help books written about how to be more mindful. But tell me, how difficult is that when you live in a busy city, which requires you to always be planning your next move? When we're stuck in our heads and preoccupied with our next task, we can't be in the moment and enjoying it. But what about if we could design our cities so that they nudge us to be more present, more spontaneous? Well, behavioural economics in urban planning and design is nothing new. Who's heard of the famous piano stair experiment? Now that we've seen just how powerful, yet incredibly simple, the concept of urban behavioural economics is, I'm going to ask you to keep that lens on, because we're going on a tour to explore some of the new urban planning concepts that are landing right now in all corners of the globe. Many cities around the world are now nudging people out of cars by creating safer places for people to walk and to bike. And in response, people are reclaiming the streets. The key question being asked is, what if economics is not based around the car? What if it was based around the human? We could build a stronger economy, much greater health, and work at a much quicker pace towards sustainable life on the planet. This question is now being answered by urban planners around the world, and we're seeing what happens when you give streets back to people. In Madrid, they banned cars from the city centre in 2018. And it resulted in a 9.5% boost to retail spending. This was measured over a 1-month period, and in that same month, emissions of nitrogen oxide fell by 38% in Madrid centre, while carbon dioxide emissions dropped by 14.2%. Oslo is also making their main objective to give the streets back to people. Hannah Mukasson, which is Oslo's Vice Mayor for Urban Development, says, for us, the street should be where you meet people, eat at outdoor restaurants, where kids play and where art is exhibited. Now, to achieve this, Oslo has closed off certain streets in the centre to cars entirely, and they've also removed almost all the parking spots, and they've replaced them with cycling lanes, benches, and miniature parks. Now, while business owners initially worried the city centre would become a ghost town, the opposite seems to be true, as in many other cities that have converted some streets to pedestrian-only areas. The areas that are in Oslo that have been pedestrianised are now the most popular parts of the city. Barcelona has taken this idea from the city centre to the suburbs. These are Barcelona's superblocks. They are neighbourhoods of 3x3 blocks where traffic is restricted to major roads around the outside of the superblock, opening up entire groups of streets to pedestrians and cyclists. Every intersection is transformed into playgrounds and public squares. Now, they give the residents much needed relief from noise and air pollution. But most importantly, superblocks stitch the urban fabric back together to reunite the segregated flow of people, nature, and energy. Now, what about an entire city being car-free, or an entire town? Well, we can look to the Spanish town of Pontevedra. They're a happy little carless city of around 2,500 people. This town is a long-standing example of the positive outcomes that happen when streets are handed back to people. This town was pedestrianised in 2000, and since then, they have seen deaths from traffic accidents drop to zero, and CO2 emissions drop by 70%, and small businesses in the economy flourish. Aside from the economic, health, and environmental benefits, do you know what I love most about walkable cities? Spontaneity. Let me explain. Cities that prioritise cars means that we need to plan our schedule, and you have to plan what time you need to leave home to beat the traffic or make the bus. Or even if you just want to see your friends, you have to plan ahead and then drive 20 minutes across town to see them. And so when we are always planning our next moves, it means we're stuck in our heads. And when we're preoccupied with our next task, we can't be in the moment. But walkable cities nudge us to be more present, more spontaneous. I liken the feeling to skiing. Because when you ski, you're totally free and present. You're in discovery mode. You try out different slopes, stop somewhere for lunch, maybe have a cheeky beverage or two. You've got nowhere in particular to be and nothing that you have to do, but only to remain open to the next experience that's waiting for you. Now, when you live in a walkable city, you are city skiing and your ability to live in the moment is ignited. But did you know that you can also city ski on a bike? How about these hot tracks for some fun city skiing? Glow-in-the-dark bike paths make it easier for cyclists to see and be seen, but they also just make for a way more enjoyable and cooler cycling experience. So there's a trend that's moving away from grey concrete and towards luminescent designs. Cycle paths are lighting up across Europe. This is one of my favourite examples. It's a cycle path in the Netherlands. It contains thousands of twinkling coloured stones. The stones are charged by daylight, and they display fragments of the famous Starry Night painting by Van Gogh. It's so easy to city ski on your bike when cars are no longer catered for as the main priority on the roads. This is an example in Cambridge. It's the UK's first Dutch-style roundabout. It opened in July. Now, drivers predicted it would be deadly, but actually there hasn't been one collision. As we can see, a design that prioritises cyclists and pedestrians over motorists makes it way safer than ever to say, "On your bike, mate." Bike buses are a thing, coming to a roundabout near you. COVID-19 has actually supercharged this trend of making our cities more walkable and cyclable, and it's happening right around the world. So in Milan, they've reallocated 35 kilometres of streets from cars to pedestrians and cyclists on a trial basis. London's mayor has said parts of central London will be declared car-free, with some streets converted to walking and cycling only, and others restricted to all other traffic apart from buses. Buenos Aires has pedestrianised approximately 100 streets to help people to avoid crowds and to encourage commercial interactions within the same neighbourhood. Tel Aviv will convert 11 popular streets into pedestrian zones closed to vehicles in the coming weeks to encourage local trade and allow more outdoor restaurant and cafe seating. And Bogota in Colombia, they actually ban cars every Sunday. People love it, using the streets for cycling, running, push-ups, and even just relaxing on deck chairs. And Melbourne is in the making to become Australia's most bike-friendly city, and they're putting in more than 50 kilometres of protected on-road bike lanes leading to the central city. Now, while it's important to provide people with great walking and biking mobility options so that they can get around, it's also important to provide places so they can stick around. Community space is where the magic happens. In the summer of 2009, following an increase in the number of traffic accidents in the Times Square area, the city's Department of Transportation closed off Broadway to vehicles and created temporary pedestrian-only spaces. Now, the change was such a success that the city decided to make it permanent. But what's cool about this is that they catered for people's different needs and modes of being. They created designated zones. So there's the chill out zone. It's got massive benches, umbrellas, so people can sit and eat and take in the sights. It's perfect for the hungover tourists and the uni students. Now, for the stressed out executives with their Starbucks, there's the express lanes. This allows for unencumbered pedestrian access through the plaza. And then they've got designated activity zones where commercial activity is permitted, like buskers and taking photographs. But if you're not a big city, or you don't have the funds or the backing from massive infrastructure projects, or there's no space to make a park, you can make a parklet. These are fun, pop-up public spaces. They activate the streets and they give people places to park themselves. Parklets are proving really popular among city communities as they support and build off the kinds of places that people like to be. They're installed on public land. They're temporary, and so they can't be controlled by the business or the shops that they front onto. Anyone can use parklets, whether they buy something or not. I love this pop-up example from Copenhagen, and I just get such a buzz every time I see car spaces being reclaimed for people. Public spaces are like community anchors. Successful plazas and neighbourhood squares encourage lingering and interaction. They allow for incidental encounters, spontaneity. But most importantly, they bring an area to life and they give a community a space in which everyone is invited to participate and belong. Another way I like to think of these spaces is they're kind of like outdoor community living rooms. We know that face recognition occurs from a distance of about 70 to 50 metres, and at 25 metres, facial expression and details are understood. So within these community living rooms, the momentary glances and shared spaces between strangers can decrease feelings of loneliness and increase a sense of belonging to a community. And I know you'll agree this is so important for well-being, especially today, where the prevalence of loneliness is so high. But sometimes finding space in highly urbanised areas can be a bit tricky. So urban planners are exploring new ways of providing community space. We're discovering that space does not need to be limited to land. Welcome to waterhoods. The traditional neighbourhood is moving onto water. Now, these dotted lines that you can see in this picture are the Wild Mile in Chicago. It currently looks like this, an industrialised, pretty ugly looking stretch of the Chicago River. Now, the government, in partnership with the community, came up with a new vision over the course of many community meetings, and their collective vision looks like this. The Wild Mile will be the first ever mile-long floating eco-park in the world, and it will create new opportunities for habitat restoration, education, and recreation. And it looks exactly like the place I would love to take my 5-year-old son to explore on a Sunday morning. What about a floating school? This was an experiment in the Nigerian city of Lagos. This is a city that's affected by tidal surges. Now, to meet the educational needs of this city's growing population, an urban planning company called NLE designed and built the Macalco Floating School. It's a structure with a flotation platform at its base, and it adapts to tidal state changes and varying water levels. But the awesomeness of Macalco's floating school does not stop there. Incorporated into this experimental design was renewable energy to provide all its own power needs, along with facilities to recycle organic waste and to harvest rainwater. Sadly though, in 2016, the experimental school collapsed due to heavy rain. It was empty at the time, so no one was hurt. Subsequently, 3 new versions have been released by the designer NLE, and the second one got displayed in the Belgium city of Bruges, and it promises a 25-year lifespan. Where one floating door closes, it seems many more can open. Now for a bit of fun, let's sneak peek at the future. What once seemed like the moonshot vision of tech billionaires and idealistic architects could soon become a concrete solution to several of the world's most pressing challenges. A UN-backed group of builders, engineers, and architects have collectively debuted a concept for an affordable floating city. At its essence, it would be a collection of hexagonal platforms, each containing villages. And each village is designed to achieve full autonomy by producing its own power, fresh water, and heat. And it would also produce its own fresh food. The city wouldn't contain any high-rises or polluting vehicles, and all buildings would be constructed out of sustainable materials like timber and bamboo. But if you think that having whole cities and villages live and thrive on water is just too far-fetched, well, I can tell you firsthand, I've seen this for myself. The Uros are an indigenous people of Peru and Bolivia, and they live on 121 man-made floating islands in Peru's Lake Titicaca. Here are some of the photos from my own trip to the floating islands to see their incredible waterhood for myself. The Uros use the totora reed, which is plentiful along the edges of the lake, to make their homes, their furniture, their boats, and yes, the very islands that they live on. The Uros tribe predate Incan civilization, and they continue to hunt and fish the plentiful land and waters that they occupy. And they're also an incredible example of human adaptability, combining old technologies with the new. Note these photos that I took, and particularly the one on the right with a solar panel on the roof, which is powering their handmade totora reed home. Here we are, waving goodbye to our waterhood neighbours. It really makes you think that perhaps the next generation of floating cities might indeed be just around the corner. But our neighbourhoods and cities aren't just expanding onto water, they're also going underground. This here, what you're looking at, is the construction site of a mega transportation hub in the Tongzhou district of Beijing, China. It spans 1.3 million square kilometres underground, 1.3 million square metres underground. And this sub-city began construction in November last year, and when it's completed in 5 years' time, it will be one of the world's largest underground hubs, visited by almost 500,000 people per day. This 3-layered giant sub-city is based on the urban planning concept of a transit-orientated development. a concept I enjoy affectionately referring to as a TOD. TODs are compact, walkable, mixed-use communities, and they're centred around high-quality public transport stations. TODs make it possible to live without the need for a car and lead a low-stress lifestyle, one that doesn't depend on a car for mobility and survival, but is instead filled with spontaneity. How about this for an underground development that's designed solely for pedestrians? This is Path. It's an underground network in downtown Toronto, and it spans more than 30 kilometres of restaurants, shopping, services and entertainment. It has a total of 1,200 stores. To give you an idea of just how big the underground network is, let's take a quick look at their map. This is the top section of the underground walkable domain, Path. Now, moving south, the walkway facilitates pedestrian links that are used by 200,000 people every day. It's so big, when you look at this, you could easily confuse it with like an underground metro map or something. And here it is reaching to the southern core of the CBD. But what's key to note here is that Path provides an important contribution to the economic viability of the city's downtown core. Improved walkability equals improved economic outcomes. When you pave the way for pedestrians, you pave the way for economic returns. Now, let's visit somewhere a little closer to home. This is the latest trend in underground services. It's high-tech automated waste collection systems, and this is going to be installed in the new Maroochydore City Centre. So for the first time in Australia, rather than using wheelie bins, waste will be transported from commercial buildings, apartments and public spaces through a system of underground vacuum pipes that have speeds of 70 kilometres an hour. This new system is so much more efficient, and it really helps to create a much cleaner and healthier, more attractive city centre. And without a doubt, the elimination of early morning garbage collection will create far less cranky citizens. Recycling rates are also expected to improve. Yes, creating cleaner cities is key to our future. So why not make them cleaner and more beautiful at the same time? This is a public art project in Warsaw, Poland that also cleans the city air. It's a giant mural made of special sun-activated smog-cleaning pigments, and it was painted by local artists. Now, through this process, the mural reportedly purifies the surrounding air, equivalent to 720 trees. Yes, our cities are getting cleaner to the point we're even installing solar into clear glass panels.
For us, it's about another Australian first and really getting ourselves out there in terms of thinking about the next phase of our integrated energy and solar rollout. So there's lots of roof space, and we'll eventually take all that up, and we can take a functional form that sits around us here in Chadstone, for example, windows and glass, atriums, and turn that into clean energy for our centres.
Just imagine a town like Port Macquarie, where every building window, every car windshield, every smartphone screen is its own energy producing cell. You start to realise that cities, local communities and towns can become their own power plants. But it's not just our buildings that are getting greener. 8 years ago, China took a prototype for an electric bus to Belgium for an industry conference, and everyone laughed at them. Today, in the city of Shenzhen, the entire bus and taxi fleet is now electric. So to put that into perspective, Shenzhen's fleet is 3 times bigger than the biggest fleet in the US, which is New York's. And now, Chinese cities are adding a bus fleet the size of London's every 5 weeks. And all of those buses are battery powered. So at this rate, by 2025, half the world's buses will be electric. Utrecht, a city in the Netherlands, is also bringing in electric buses, and they aim to have completely clean public transport by 2028. The electricity to power these buses comes directly from the Dutch windmills. But what's really cool about this electric bus initiative are the bus stops themselves. So the rooftops of these bus stops have been covered in plants as a gift to the honeybee. They've transformed these shelters, and they support the city's biodiversity, but they also help to capture fine dust and store rainwater. The roofs are looked after by workers who drive around in electric vehicles, and the bus stops have all been fitted with LED lights and bamboo benches. This concept of living in harmony with nature is at the heart of the next generation urban planning, where cities actually restore natural systems rather than diminish them. Making our cities more attractive to diverse insects, birds and wildlife is key to improving their biodiversity. And this was the very goal of Japanese botanist Akira Miyawaki. Now, he's an expert in plant ecology. He specialises in seeds and the study of natural forests, and he created the miniature urban forest. Now, this is a method that's based on complex ecosystems that improve biodiversity, grow quickly, and absorb more CO2. So, you want to improve the biodiversity of a heavily polluted intersection? Throw a few Miyawaki forests into the middle of it. After more than 1,000 such forests being planted in Japan and Malaysia, these tiny, dense forests are springing up around Europe. It's part of the movement to restore biodiversity and fight the climate crisis. Now, they're often sited in schoolyards or alongside roads, and they can be as small as a tennis court. Here's a Miyawaki forest being planted on the outskirts of Paris in France. And Bombay is also getting their first Miyawaki forest, which is going to be built by the community themselves. And it's worth it. These miniature forests grow 10 times faster, become 30 times denser, and 100 times more biodiverse than those planted by conventional methods. But rewilding doesn't need to be limited to the ground. We're talking green buildings, literally. This particular example has made headlines around the world. The vertical forest is a prototype building for a new format of architectural biodiversity. The concept being a home for trees, which also houses humans and birds. And it's certainly achieved the goal of improving biodiversity. Just a few years after its construction, the vertical forest has given birth to a habitat of around 1,600 specimens of birds and insects, establishing an outpost of spontaneous flora and fauna in the city. And it's so successful that China is now building entire neighbourhoods based on the Milan prototype. Now, regulatory nudges can also make a huge difference. So Singapore has what they appropriately call a LUSH policy, and it stands for Landscaping for Urban Spaces and High-Rises. This is a town planning policy under which property developers must replace greenery that's lost from a site with greenery in other areas, such as green roofs and rooftop urban farms. No wonder Singapore is often touted as the greenest city in the world. But out of everything that we've seen tonight in this presentation, I want to remind you that at the heart of it all is people. Regeneration can be people-led too. Libraries are all about books, or at least they were, because you can now visit them to borrow seeds to grow your own flowers and create your own vegetable garden. Seed libraries are small community-run boxes, often in someone's front yard, and they stock packets of plant seeds, which users are encouraged to take home and grow. 12 of these opened up in the Launceston area in Tassie within the past couple of months. And interestingly, the founder, Jo McLaughlin, who you're looking at here, said that they wouldn't have worked prior to the coronavirus pandemic. She said that while all the parks and community centres had to close, we still have the streets, and you can still talk over the fence. And that's what's made these seed libraries so popular. They really are gold for strengthening connections within a community. Here's another example of people-led regeneration. This is Afroz Shah. He's a lawyer and environmentalist from Mumbai, and he lives next to Versova Beach. This is one of the city's dirtiest and most polluted spots. One day he came down to the beach and started picking up litter. He was a single person, what could he couldn't possibly make a difference to the mountains of rubbish, but he kept coming anyway. And after a few weeks, others started joining him. And then the city council heard about it, and they sent a few trucks, and even more people heard about it, and eventually the entire community was down there. Over 120 weeks, that's almost 2 and a bit years, residents removed 5 million kilograms of trash. It was piled 3 to 4 metres deep. It was the largest beach cleanup of all time, transforming it from this into this. Now, in week 127, they were rewarded by the return of the sea turtles for the first time in 20 years. It's an incredible story of people-led regeneration. Now, it's time to wrap up this urban exploration. At the start, we saw that cities are indeed the cause of many of humanity's problems. We've also seen that they hold the promise to solve exactly the same problems they cause. I mean, if we can create climate change by accident, imagine what we can do when we try. Crowded cities can become more serendipitous. Our polluted cities can become cleaner and greener. Instead of social isolation, we can become more connected than ever before. And we can, because people change cities. I'm just one urban planner among thousands that are driving change towards more well-designed cities. And we're all focused on the central task that I think was summed up perfectly and beautifully by Buckminster Fuller. To make the world work for 100% of humanity in the shortest possible time, through spontaneous cooperation without the ecological offence or the disadvantage of anyone. But to make that happen, we're going to need everyone. And that means you. See, the people in a community, they're the true experts. Your local knowledge is gold. People make cities. This is your time. And what an incredible time it is, because this urban renaissance is upon us. And now you know where to look. You'll see its green shoots everywhere. Thank you.
Thanks, Melissa. Wow, what an amazing presentation, and how we can change our place. So now that everybody's watching, hopefully you can start thinking about big ideas that can happen in our smaller, more regional and rural communities, but these are all things that are transferable. So start thinking about your big ideas, and the panel will be back to talk about them soon. But next up, I'd like to invite Joshua Karras, who is from the United Nations Association of Australia New South Wales Division. Josh's role is to educate and engage with people around the Sustainability Development Goals, and to create events, educate and allow people to get involved with reporting and understanding what those goals can be to make our world a better place for the future. He has come to us today to talk about these development goals and how we can get involved. And we're having a slight technical issue, so I'm just going to keep talking about some wonderful things that have come up from our community around how do we do placemaking and urban design in our regional rural cities. How can we ensure we are looking after our environment and protecting it for the future? What are our transport options for 30 years from now? What biodiversity and food security do we need to think about? How do we ensure that we have a secure water source for the next 30 plus years? So these are all things that we need to explore, but we also need solutions for. So we need our community to come up with solutions and big ideas, which hopefully you'll be able to give to us. But now that Josh is all ready to go and technically capable, we are going to throw to Josh Karras. Thank you very much for joining us, Josh.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for that warm welcome. And thank you to Melissa, who just spoke previously. I am feeling super charged up, and I hope you are too. I really appreciated that call to action, Melissa, where we got to hear about the true and valid fact that it is in the community and the locals that have the real power to bring about change in their communities. And it's my job today to talk to you about how we can translate that into global citizenship and the broader global impact that you, as an individual working in your community, can make that difference. So, as mentioned, my name is Joshua Karras. I'm the Executive Manager of the UN Association of Australia New South Wales Division, and it's a pleasure to be speaking with you tonight. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I'm speaking from, the Burpipe Nation. I pay my respects to them and their elders, past, present and emerging, and acknowledge and celebrate the continuous contributions that they are making. It's very important, I believe, that we need to focus on not just including them in the conversation in policies that relate to them, but also the broader policy when it comes to frameworking our future and when it comes to sustainable development, which brings me on to our SDGs. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about more where I come from. The UNAA is the preeminent body for furthering the work of the United Nations in Australia. We work to inform and engage Australians on the UN and in particular the Sustainable Development Goals. We partner with business, federal, state and local government, universities, civil society, and you name it, to ensure that we hold events and programs that can inform, engage and inspire the population. So, what are the SDGs? Well, simply put, the SDGs are 17 goals to change the world, developed by and for all nations. They were signed on by all 193 United Nations member states in 2015 and provide a framework for promoting peace and prosperity for people and the planet, now and in the future. Here is a short video to take you through what they are.
We can be.
We must be the first generation
to end extreme poverty.
The generation
Most determined
to fight injustice
and inequalities.
The generation that saves the planet from climate change.
And this is how it will get done.
The global goals.
a 15-year plan
For everyone, everywhere.
with no one left behind.
We will live in a world
Where nobody
anywhere lives in extreme poverty.
Where no one
goes hungry.
Where no one
Wakes in the morning.
asking if there will be food today.
We will live in a world where no child has to die.
Diseases we know how to cure.
And where proper health care
is a lifelong right for us all.
We will live in a world
Where everyone
Goes to school.
and education gives us the knowledge
and skills
for a fulfilling life.
We will live in a world where all girls and all women have equal opportunities
to thrive
And be powerful.
and safe.
we cannot succeed if half the world is held back.
We will live in a world
Where all people can get clean water.
And proper toilets
At home,
at school.
and at work.
We will live in a world where there is sustainable energy for everyone.
Heat, light,
And power for the whole planet.
Without destroying the planet.
we will live in a world where economies prosper.
And new wealth.
Lead to decent jobs.
for everyone.
And we will live in a world where our industry
our infrastructure and our
Best innovations.
Are not just used to make money, but to make all our lives better.
We will live in a world
Where prejudices and extremes of inequality
Are defeated.
Inside our countries
And between different countries.
where people live in cities and communities
that are safe, progressive,
and support everyone who lives there.
where we replace
What we consume.
Planet where we put back what we take out of the earth.
We live in a world that is decisively rolling back the threat of climate
change.
where we restore and protect the life in our oceans and seas. We'll restore
and protect
Life on land.
The forests,
animals,
the earth itself.
With peace between and inside countries.
where all governments are open.
And answer to us for what they do at home and abroad.
And the justice rules.
With everyone equal before the law.
Where all countries and we their people.
Work together.
In partnerships of all kinds.
To make these goals a reality.
These are the United Nations global goals.
For sustainable development.
Let's
get to work.
Isn't that inspiring? So the SDGs were built upon the Millennial Development Goals, or MDGs, which were in place from the year 2000 to 2015. In the year 2000, the world came together under the power of a new millennium and realized we are human beings, we love goals. Let's make some to help us achieve a better world for ourselves and for our children's children. And that's exactly what happened. So in 2015, we refreshed them, and bang, we have the SDGs. It's important to note that these goals are for all countries, developing and developed. There is, however, a common misconception that in the developed world, the SDGs are not for us, which I think is especially the case here in Australia, as most people haven't even heard of the SDGs or don't believe they apply to us. The fact is that the SDGs are goals developed by everyone, for everyone, through the largest consultation process in history, across all countries and all sectors. We have 10 years to the year 2030 when they are due, and many of the goals are not on track, as we'll be going through today, over the next 15 minutes. It's clear that urgent and transformational change is needed to increase progress towards achieving this goal. So, why are these goals important? Please note, I'm breaking a cardinal rule of presentations by including most of what I'm going to say on the slides, just in case you'd like to screenshot something, as this is an online event. So, firstly, people. Since the 1990s, there's been a 40% reduction in the number of people living in poverty, but over 700 million people continue to live on less than $2 a day. Over 800 million people go hungry, which is on the increase. We've seen a stall in the progress for treatment of preventable diseases. Yet in some regions, and unfortunately in many regions, diseases such as malaria progress has stalled or regressed. Over 600 million children don't have the basic skills in literacy or numeracy, and 1 in 5 children don't even attend school. Overwhelmingly, it's girls who are affected, despite generally having better outcomes in education than boys. Inequality has increased in many different countries when it comes to Australia. And we've had over 30 years of economic growth, which of course has now ended due to the pandemic, unfortunately. But during that time, the rich got richer and the poor got poorer. I'm just going to refer to my notes. I'll bring the lectern over here. There we go. Unfortunately, the environment is very much the same. This council, I'm very glad to see, is fully well aware that climate action and climate change is certainly at the top of their priority list. We have seen the degradation of our climate across all fronts, which is, of course, a huge shame because, unfortunately, for our children's children, there will not be a beach, there will not be a rainforest for us to enjoy in this council especially. So, we have to consider that when it comes to peace as well, many conflicts are continuing across the world, and vulnerable peoples and those living in poverty are most affected, being a main factor over the 65 million people who are displaced currently in the world. Tensions across the globe and between all countries, as well as issues relating to international security, are of increasing concern. So, how are we progressing? Unfortunately, we've been slipping since the goals commenced in 2015. It's important to understand where Australia sits because it should motivate us as we can see that we are simply slipping through the ranks. There is a perception that SDGs, as I mentioned, don't apply to us, which is a real issue. The fact is that Australia has gone backwards relative to the rest of the world, and we have no plan of how we're going to implement or even achieve the SDGs. Public awareness is low, and when I'm asked about what badge I'm wearing on my lapel in that colourful rainbow of the SDGs, people think it relates to the marriage debate. Unfortunately, as we'll soon find out, when it comes to SDG 13 climate action, Australia is one of the worst performers. So here's a lovely little summary of how we're going. We are on track to achieve 3 of the goals: Goal 1, 3 and 8. However, it's not a good indicator to show how Australia is performing in supporting vulnerable peoples, including SDG 1 and 3, and in particular for Australia's First Peoples and new arrivals. We're performing okay, but not on track to achieve SDGs 4, 5, 6, 9, 11, 14, 15, 16 and 17. Progress towards these goals is either stagnating or moderately improving. And finally, we are performing particularly poorly in these goals here. Have a look at those. I don't know about you, but these issues seem pretty important to me. When it comes to SDG 13, we're coming in the bottom 3 of the SDG index of 162 countries measured. I'm going to take you now through 4 goals in a little more detail this evening, and by the end, explain what you can do to help. So, SDG 3, good health and well-being, a goal that's received particular attention this year. We are still on track to achieve this goal. Australians experience a very high standard of living. Public expenditure on health and the universal public healthcare system have resulted in one of the highest average life expectancy rates in the world. However, more work is required to ensure the healthy lives and well-being of disadvantaged groups, especially Indigenous people. Currently, there's a large gap between the health of Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. Globally, as we know, COVID-19 has resulted in many healthcare disruptions, which could reverse decades of improvement. The pandemic has interrupted childhood immunization programs in around 70 countries. Hundreds of thousands of additional under-5 deaths are expected in 2020. Illness and death from communicable diseases will spike. Service cancellations will lead to a 100% increase in malaria deaths. SDG 4. Unfortunately, we're making minimal progress on this goal. We have remote and disadvantaged communities facing significant challenges in accessing quality education. More broadly, Australia has a relatively skilled workforce, especially in the field of technology. I was fortunate enough to speak with a student living rurally, and I got to speak to them and hear about how they were coping through COVID. They told me something that was a very simple logistical issue, that they couldn't write fast enough, and sometimes their Zoom calls would drop out and they missed the notes. That's one of the reasons that I've actually got all of my notes on the slide for you to screenshot in case internet at home drops out for you. You can screenshot and not miss anything. Further work is required to reduce inequalities in this way to quality education to ensure that no one is left behind. Across the globe, the pandemic has caused schools to close and kept 90% of students out of school, reversing years of progress on education. Remote learning remains out of reach for at least 500 million students. These are huge numbers. Inequalities in education have been exacerbated, particularly in low-income countries. And only 65% of primary schools kids have basic handwriting facilities critical for COVID-19 prevention. Another important goal, SDG 8, decent work and economic growth. Unfortunately, we experienced, as I mentioned, nearly 30 years of growth since the last recession in 1990. Unemployment, underemployment, unpaid care economy, and underemployment amongst disadvantaged communities are real areas of concern, especially now due to COVID. We need to work to promote inclusive, productive, and decent work for all Aussies. Once again, due to COVID, the world faces the worst economic recession since the Great Depression because of COVID-related implications. GDP per capita is expected to decline by 4.2% globally. In 2020, during the pandemic, 1.6 billion workers in the informal economy risk losing their jobs. Tourism is also facing unprecedented challenges. It's a terrible story I'm telling, isn't it? And finally, we move on to SDG 11, a goal that would certainly relate to Melissa's talk previously. Sustainable cities and communities. I see her giving the big thumbs up over there. Issues relating to housing affordability and the cost of living are on the rise. More people are facing rental and mortgage stress, and home ownership is decreasing, especially amongst young people. Globally, 90% of COVID cases are in urban areas, a very important note to make. Okay, we made it. We got past the negative Nancy part of the talk. Well done, everyone. So, how can we work towards a better future by using the SDGs? Firstly, educate yourself. Pick a goal that matters to you. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram at UNANSW to hear more about events and programs that align with a goal that matters to you. This is really important because by education, you can learn about where the need is within your community and you can bring about change in that way. In addition, if you'd like to learn more about studying a UN diploma, I'll have my email address at the end that you guys can use to hear more about upskilling yourselves and training to become a UN global citizen in your community. So, what can you do as an individual to conquer these huge societal concerns? 17 of them. It can be pretty overwhelming. The first thing I'll say to you is think about a little niggling issue that you see in your community. What is one thing that you would like to change that would make your community a better place to live? Just pick one for starters. The next thing to do is to align it to one of the 17 SDGs. Look at which one it fits into, and the goal that it aligns with is your goal. Take ownership of it, it's yours. It's designed for you. Be conscious of your environmental footprint at all times. Don't consume goods or services which are unstable or irresponsible supply chains or support slavery, which does exist even in today's day and age. It's hard to believe, isn't it? Switch to energy-efficient appliances, grow sustainable foods, and buy sustainably sourced and minimally packaged goods. You can see all these other options. Be conscious of your environmental footprint in the office. Use a keep cup. Go paperless. Walk, bike, take public transport. All aligning with what Melissa's already said. Use a refillable drink bottle. Speak up against all forms of discrimination and inequalities in the household, workplace, and the public. If you don't say anything, who will? If your employer isn't a role model, advocate for change. You are a global citizen if you choose to. You need to stay informed. Read up on the SDGs, start conversations, and do what you can to be better. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to catching up with you in a moment to talk about the SDGs and about how our future is determined by what we do today. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Joshua. Josh is going to come and join us on the panel. We've got some really great ideas and questions coming through Facebook from the community. So once Josh is ready and sitting down, it's so inspiring to have you talk to our community and really broaden their thinking about what is possible. I know that there was lots of examples of cities and sometimes regional people can't wrap their minds around the fact that that is possible in our local places and spaces. But I think I might start off with a simple question before we jump into the Facebook comments. You've been here for a day. You've been able to get out in our places and spaces and understand a little bit about our region. So what do you think could be a big idea for the Port Macquarie Hastings region? Melissa?
Can I just start by saying something that I really love about it?
Absolutely.
I really feel like, well, I've only been in the Port Macquarie town today and walking around, and I just felt like there was so much identity being expressed. The painted rocks and just like the community spaces, it just felt like a really fun place to be a part of, and there was a lot to experience. And yeah, so I just wanted to say that. Look, personally, I think, you know, you could probably tell from my talk, I'm a very, you know, I'm against cars necessarily, but more pro-walking. And I just think that it would be really interesting to see maybe Port Macquarie even trial something like what they do in Bogota in Colombia, which is just banning cars from the streets one day a week, and just see what happens.
Coincidentally, one of our Think 2050 ambassadors actually has posed that question to our community to be carless in our CBDs and see how that works. So creating really people places and getting people to connect, I think, is a fabulous outcome for our community. Josh, same question for you.
It's a paradise. How can you ask to approve a paradise? No, I really enjoyed it. Just same things, Melissa. I really enjoyed just walking down the breakers. What is it called?
Break wall?
The break wall.
Yep.
I was just having my fish and chips, and I saw families that were just happy to be being. It was just something that I think is quite rare in as a city dweller. People are just in the moment, and it was a delight. For me, I would say looking into the nightlife of a scene could be improved upon, just in the sense of allowing people to hang around and linger in these wonderful public spaces that you've got just for a little bit longer into the wonderful spring and summer nights that we find ourselves
encouraging
into.
that nighttime economy.
That's right, yeah.
Particularly in summer, this place is just magical.
Yeah, absolutely, I'm sure.
Some glow-in-the-dark bike paths might go.
I did look into that a couple of years ago. We did have some suggestions about our coastal walk, which is a 9-kilometre walk along the coastal walk along the foreshore.
Yeah,
would be perfect. We've just put in some new things. So, first question from our community was: there's big ideas happening around the world to manage and combat climate change. What do you think is possible for a place like Port Macquarie Hastings to achieve some climate change outcomes?
No, please, ladies first.
Thank you, Josh. Look, I think what's interesting, or what's good to remember, is that while some of those examples that I spoke about seem global because they're from different countries around the world, once you get to those places, that's a local place too. And so, for example, the Miyawaki forests, I gave that example of you know, communities doing research about them and just growing them themselves. So those type of things are things that can be done by the community, and you know, that's local. That's something that can really change the biodiversity of this region.
So would the big idea from that be something around changing policy or changing process to empower the community to be able to feel they can do those kind of actions to create change?
Look, absolutely. It can come from both ways, but I think this FutureThink you know, planning program that you're doing is amazing, because if this is really about community and council coming together, and you can meet in the middle, and I think it would be great when you do get those ideas that come in, if you can help be that structure to actually implement them, is amazing. And I know that's what the council's intending to do, and I think it's awesome.
Excellent. And Josh, I'll let you answer the question about
Sure.
climate change. I think I know the answer from the SDGs, but...
Look, of course, my answer is just going to be whatever idea someone has, if it can be aligned with an SDG and the targets that lay beneath each of the goals, you know you're on the right track, because that's when you know, you've got the backing of the largest consultative process in history.
Yep.
So as long as you can also use it for inspiration, vice versa. Look through the targets, and then from that, be inspired to think of a big idea in that way.
Excellent. Change. Josh, I've got another question for you this time, and it's around local examples of SDGs. So can you provide some, I guess, more inspiration to our community out there around what you've seen locally from an SDG perspective?
Absolutely. So let's take SDG 2, Zero Hunger.
Yep.
We were part of we're part of an organisation called Gift of Bread, where they take reused, I shouldn't say reused, unused bread from bakeries that at the end of the day would otherwise be thrown out. And it gets repurposed, refitted, and delivered to those who need it. So the good thing about this is, I've said SDG 2, right? Responsible consumption and production, another SDG, is simultaneously being achieved from a community level in reducing wastage.
Yep.
So that's a real using that example, we can learn a very important lesson that it's very hard to simply achieve one of the goals. You're going to accidentally touch on a couple of others, which is great. It's efficient.
Yeah.
So that's just one example of how SDGs can be used at that local grassroots level.
Excellent. I'm pretty sure that happens in our local area
Fantastic.
as well.
That's
so
great.
we're already achieving some local development goals.
Excellent.
How good is that? My next question is probably a bigger one, and it is relating around transport, which is a big issue for our community and how we get around and how we connect to each other. Have you seen any big ideas in your research or your understanding, particularly urban design, around transport initiatives? I know you touched on some of them in your presentation, that we as a local area should be looking at for our future.
Look, I think that the thing that I did notice is missing here is more those, it's called the last mile type of transport options, and it's where, you know, it's a little bit too far to walk or to bike potentially, but it's, you know, it's not that far that you wouldn't get in a car. It's not so far that you would get in a car. So it's kind of in between. And I think that's where light rail is kind of helping the missing middle there. And it's something that, you know, is easy to jump on and off. It's actually, it intertwines quite easily with pedestrian environments. So it helps them as opposed to segregating them, which the car does.
Yeah, and I think for our region, it's really quite important to understand how we do those big connections, because we have our outlying towns and villages like Laurelton and Wauchope that really would like that better connection and connectivity, and how do we do that? Did you have anything to say on greater transport outcomes?
Just to add to Mel's suggestion of light rail, something that, as some people may know, was recently released in Sydney. I've seen a huge, just from personal experience, I don't bring your expertise, but I have seen personally just a change in the way locals and tourists to make use of areas that were previously inaccessible, that were just slightly, as you mentioned, I like that concept, the last mile, just slightly out of the way, and now being, you know, used at a community-based level. So I would suggest that's a good idea.
And then reactivating the places and spaces in between. Excellent. So I really do want to ask about flying cars and the Jetson world, because growing up, I mean, I grew up in the, I'm not going to say when I grew up because it's too long ago, but we did talk about flying cars in 2020. I know in some places the flying drones that take people are a reality. Is this a reality for 30 years from now, given that we didn't have mobile phones, internet, etc. 30 years ago?
Yeah, Josh and I were just looking at this earlier, actually. So there is the trial in Melbourne of Uber Air. So that's a flying taxi service, which are in a type of helicopter, next generation type of helicopter. Look, it's hard to say and predict where that's going. I always like to think about what is going to be the best for the people in each city. And I think there's a logistical type of thing and an efficiency type of thing. Really, flying, I don't know, for me, it's not something that I see as going to be at the top of that cost-benefit list, basically. But that doesn't mean it's not possible, and it is being trialled in different cities around the world. I think Melbourne's one of 3 that Uber Air are trialling in. So yeah, you just never know where those things are going to go.
Yeah, I had to ask, because we did have a youth summit early last week, and we had great feedback from our young people aged from kindergarten through to year 12, and one of the things they came up with, solar-powered cars and magnetic roadways. So, you know, things might be possible out there. Next question that came from our community was around smart cities and smart cities versus sustainability, or can they actually be aligned together? So do you have any big ideas or comments around how do you achieve smart cities sustainably?
This is yours once again, I think.
Yeah, look, I think they can work together. You could probably see from my talk, I'm more people and nature focused. But and I think building cities based on ecological systems should really be at the forefront. I think future cities can play a role and technologies to do with future cities can play a role to enhance nature. And that's really around data and measuring. So for example, the efficiencies of those rooftop farms that I mentioned, the reason why they're so efficient is because they're actually using technology that was proven in the Netherlands. And they actually monitor the growth of each individual potato or tomato. And so that level of data can increase efficiencies. And that's really where I think technology can come into play with nature to help achieve a greater sustainability in our cities.
Excellent. And there's obviously an SDG about sustainability and growth.
That's right. No, it makes me think about technologies that are emerging to help support the effects of climate change. I think back to a fantastic piece of technology that's I believe was installed in sections of Darwin, where in flood-prone areas, this technology, the sensor was placed in drains that was predicting when a flood was going to occur. So we're dealing with prevention of a natural disaster as opposed to harm minimization.
Yep.
The holy grail of infrastructure, being able to predict when something's going to hit, to have those evacuations, to just unplug the drains, unblock the drains before it happens. This is that cutting edge style way that I think smart cities can become, in fact, sustainable cities, and working for events that are going to happen in the future.
And that's a great example. And the waste one in Maroochydore.
Yes.
Around how do we minimise waste, which is a smart way to do it, and using smart technology.
Exactly. There's another really great example in Sydney Water. So underneath Sydney Water, there's about 250,000 kilometres or something like that of pipes and sewers and water pipes. And they have always been monitored by engineers, and they put in cameras, and then the engineers actually get to check, rather than going in there, they can actually check where pipes are cracking or whatnot, and then send someone in to fix it. Now, they've done it like that for many, many years. A couple of years ago, some graduates who were working for them, from engineering graduates, it was their job to monitor the videos. And they thought, surely there's got to be a better way, because hours and hours and hours these young girls are spending just looking at these images, trying to find the pipes, boring, trying to find these cracks. And so they actually have invented an artificial intelligence program that now watches and reads and looks at that and identifies it. So what used to take about a week of 2 people doing it now takes 4 hours.
Awesome.
Something like that. Don't quote me on those numbers, but it's sort of that dramatic, and it's just amazing. And that was just 2 engineering graduates who just went, this can be done better.
So I think further in the future, and thinking 2050, is that those 2 things coming together will actually get a better outcome. So sustainability and smart is an important thing.
Yeah.
We have a question, which I think is a great question, from one of our Think 2050 ambassadors, Greg, who is asking, how can environmental protection and the development of humans happen better together? So how can we manage growth but protect our environment? It's really quite a challenge for Port Macquarie. We've got a limited growth corridor, but lots of people wanting to come here, and after COVID they all realised they can work from anywhere, so why not work in paradise? Do you have any examples of, I guess the floating city one is a really great example of how you can get humans and growth happening together, but are there any others that you can think of?
My mind is jumping to Sydney's Barangaroo South precinct. It is considered to be one of Australia's most sustainably efficient development projects ever. They utilise every aspect of, or every piece of modern technology that relates to sustainable development. As I understand, they are not just water efficient, they are water positive.
Right.
They're from the way they collect water, they actually give water back to the community. And they have, in thinking futurely, they are prepared for when these big buildings that are currently office spaces are no longer used for offices and become apartments. They've got the infrastructure already there. Yep. So we're talking 30 years from now, we're thinking 2050.
Yep.
These buildings are already retrofitted to remain sustainable well into the future, even when they change functions. And I find that, incredible long-term thinking absolutely paramount to how we can balance, as the question asked, environmental sustainability with advancement of people as we progress through it and aim to have a better quality of life.
Fabulous example, thank you. Did you have one that?
I just wanted to make more of a comment around a concept, which is, and I know density is often has a pretty bad rap, and people don't really like that term because it conjures up images of where it has gone really bad.
Yep.
And so fair enough. But actually, density done right is amazing, and it really can tie a community together. It can solve a lot of those issues that we're talking about in terms of urban sprawl.
Yep.
It's efficient, and I just think, I don't know if you saw in some of those images, like the floating waters images with the UN city, and it's that human scale dimension, and if it's done with also more sustainable materials and more natural materials, it doesn't feel like this big concrete building.
Yeah.
Density
doesn't have to be bad if it's managed in a sustainable, environmentally friendly way.
And exactly
and
right.
that creates people, places together.
People, places, you've got it. That's
Excellent.
what I'm thinking.
I better move on to the other questions because I've got a gazillion of them, but we won't do that. There was a big question of it's probably twofold. So water security and food security. I know that they're both in the SDGs, and they're massively important after what we've been through in the last 12 months with droughts, bushfires, and now COVID. How do we, and the community farms and the rooftop farms is a fabulous idea, and we should all be doing that. Have you seen any other big ideas? And I guess Barangaroo is an example of that with the water positive. Not heard that term before, so that's a cool idea. But are there other things around food security or water security that you've seen doing cutting edge things that we should be thinking about as our big ideas for the future?
I'm just thinking about water security. I mean, it just comes down to water harvesting. And so integrating that into developments and retrofitting existing developments is really key. And so just coming up with different ways to integrate that into the community and into the city itself is I guess, the base level of achieving water security. Yep.
With that, absolutely, and in applying that practice to allow for more water efficient crop methodologies being applied will, simply lead to, I suppose, a more sustainable and efficient means of collating our crops and our food security in managing both what the demand and the capacity for supply. Yep. So I think utilising both and keeping both in mind is what's essential.
Sorry.
And the seed libraries are good for food security.
Do you know what? Our library actually has a seed library. We were one of the first in our actual built form library, and we've got a seed library.
Oh, fantastic.
We're pretty, and a community garden at the library.
Oh, awesome.
Never fail to impress this council. Fantastic.
Thumbs up to our library. One of the other questions, I guess, is more about well-being and how do we, big ideas-wise, how do we foster health and education to create better outcomes for the future? Do you have any thoughts on that? I know that there's particular SDGs around health and around education.
I think it's going to come down to. Sorry, is it okay if I?
Yes,
thank you,
please. Jump in there, Josh.
You've touched on a passionate note of mine. It comes down to the empowerment of the individual. It comes down to someone determining that this is an area of societal concern that they want to improve on at that grassroots level.
Yep.
The moment that decision is made, then, as I mentioned, you pick that goal is picked. You can have a closer look at an SDG to answer your question. What can they do with that to foster it? Learn, understand what the issue is in its entirety. If there is gender inequality in relation to some positions in the workplace, understand, get the backing of the data and the SDGs, and make that change. Build a team around you and make the change.
So it comes back to that coming together, empowering the community and working together to make change.
Exactly right.
Excellent. I have one for you now.
Okay.
Melissa, I'm pretty sure you'll be able to be all over this one, which is what are big ideas that are leading to the way that urban planning, better ways of urban planning, and are there any regional examples of that?
Okay. Yeah, I think the concept that I was touched on at the start of my presentation around urban behavioural economics. So actually looking at how we can nudge our cities to make people healthier and happier is a concept and a trend that's spreading across the globe, and it's awesome to see. Like, you could see that piano stair experiment, just a simple example, but those sort of I guess influences actually do nudge people's and change people's behaviour, which is quite cool. So I think in terms of a regional example, just trying to think of some trends. I mean, I think there's, like, each city, as I said and went through, is just going towards that trend of people-focused changes. I think it was even Brisbane have just announced that they're also taking away cars for a while in the city centre. That was just today, I saw that.
And I think Paris said it too.
Yeah, Paris are doing
it. Which is massive.
Yeah, so I think that's a huge trend.
Yeah.
And the other trend that I'm seeing is, and that COVID is kind of supercharged, is this idea of decentralisation. And so, as you said, people are moving away from the big cities and are moving into more regional areas. So the concept of a city core and then its areas around it is kind of being disrupted. And I'm really big about decentralisation because it means closer, tight-knit local neighbourhoods. And it's just a more sustainable outcome overall. So, yeah.
Excellent. So we kind of weaved all the way back to the no cars in our CBD, which is fantastic. Really appreciate your time tonight. So inspired by what you said to our community. Hopefully it inspires our community to come up with big ideas. We do have our part 2 on Thursday night, so we're encouraging everybody to come along to part 2 with their ideas, where we will have a opportunity to do Q&A with local panellists and really talk through those big ideas so that we can come up with a vision for our future together. So thank you so much for your time today. And we will look forward to telling you all about our community strategic plan as it goes forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.
And it's all about planning in our beautiful Hastings towards 2050. Now, you might have noticed all the works that are currently happening around the breakwall, around the wharf, and previously around the Doctor's Walk. That's all because of the feedback that members of the community have given council. They've listened, they've got it into action, and this is what's happening. I'm passionate about blue space and green space, but what are your big ideas? Get on Facebook and YouTube, the FutureThink Symposium. It's happening this Tuesday and Thursday night, 7 o'clock. And give council your big ideas. There'll be an opportunity to ask questions and get some answers from the keynote speakers, and then the Thursday night from the panellists. So make sure you join in on Tuesday and Thursday, because we do want to hear from you.